Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Data in the Wild. This webinar is part of our customer webinar series, Talk Data to Me, which is aimed to provide tips, tricks, and how-tos to make you a smarter Tableau customer. My name is Megan Fay. I'm part of the marketing team here at Tableau, and I'll be your moderator. Just a few quick items before we get started. All lines are currently muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A window and select Send to all panelists. We'll answer questions at the end if time allows. The recording of this webinar and a copy of the slides will be emailed out after the webinar. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Eric Teutsch. Eric is a sales consultant here at Tableau, and we'll be discussing how to turn spreadsheets, text files, and other flat files into data you can actually use. Eric, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Megan. Again, my name is Eric Teutsch. I am first and foremost a Tableau product expert, and my job very often entails helping prospective customers to understand how Tableau works, how it fits in their work environment. And as part of that, I'm confronted nearly daily with spreadsheets, text files, and all sorts of crazy, shall we say, non-standard data sent into me or shown to me by people who really need Tableau. And often my job is to help them just wrangle the data to get it into Tableau so that they can actually get some insight out of this data. So that was the inspiration for this talk initially. What I'd like to see you all take away from this are a few skills, some tools, and some ideas about how to approach data so that you can actually deal with it when it's out there in the wild. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. So first of all, we'll talk a little bit about what data should look like, the implications of data shape within Tableau. We'll see some of that. How to manipulate it. Now, with Tableau 9.0, there are some new tools built in, so we'll touch on those a little bit. The environments that I see in my work are, involve a lot of Excel flying around and CSV files and things like that. So we'll talk about how to merge things like those kinds of files into something useful when you get them. We'll talk a little bit about some custom SQL, and one of the other things that I'll touch on are some of the tools that you can use to manipulate data. Things like good text editors, some tools that are out there for scraping data off the web, and of course everyone's favorite and probably the second most used tool in Tableau besides Tableau, which is of course our old friend Excel. So let's talk about the problem as I've seen it. Visualizing data from warehouses and data marts and that sort of thing, cubes, with Tableau is pretty easy. The data's been cleaned up, it's been normalized and massaged and calculated, summarized, and just generally sort of gussied up, right? The thing is that data always comes from somewhere else. Right, it's either machine generated, like from a point of sale system or from manufacturing equipment. Sometimes it's just the result of good old-fashioned data entry. So the process of getting the data from that machine generation on into a system where you can actually report off of it is what is known as ETL. That's extract, transform, and load. Your IT departments have tools that help them do this sort of thing, and just migrating the data from one place from that raw form really into the data marts where oftentimes this stuff is stored. The thing is that oftentimes in the course of daily work, you run into much more raw data, whether it's living out on the web or it's an Excel file. It can be kind of weirdly mismatched columns and things like that. Some of the stuff that you've seen on the screen here. And that's where a lot of the frustration comes with, because Tableau looks really easy, and it is really easy, but sometimes the data prep isn't. A friend of mine actually once said, what you have there isn't data, but it's something that looks tantalizingly like data. So we'll start off with, and you're all muted, but just ponder this for a moment. Is this data, or is it a report? So if you look at this, you've got a year column, but then you've also got columns going across. And if anybody's connected to data like this before, it ends up looking a little funky and being a little hard to work with. So the nature of data is something that you want to think about as being, first of all, a uniform collection of rows. All of the information in the source data in the source is related. There aren't any blank rows. There are no repeating groups, so you don't have things like that. The 12 columns of like revenue data and then 12 more columns of cost data, the way you often see things cross-tabbed out there in the world. And the data should be granular, right? So that should be at kind of the lowest level of aggregation. So if you're thinking transaction, things like something like would come out of to identify maybe an individual transaction in a store or something like that. Also, you shouldn't have a column that means more than one thing. So things like a column that says like F2-10 or M2-10, which means females and males between the ages of 2 and 10. Instead, what you should have is something like a column for gender and another column either for age or for age bracket at least. So again, if you actually connect to something like this in Tableau Desktop, what you'll often end up with is something like this. Right? You've got a list of those things, and what you really want to be visualizing and working with are those values, and not having to bring April out and February out and things like that. Tableau is not even going to treat those as a date the way we would a proper date field, because those are actually column names in this case. So that can cause things to be really difficult to work with, and you have to start doing things like adding those fields together, building calculations just to add them up in different ways. Not intuitive and not easy. So let's take just a quick look at Tableau Desktop and what this might look like. So here we are in Tableau. And what I'd like to do is actually connect to an Excel file. Let's just go ahead and grab one that looks just like the one that we had here. So if we connect to this, and I'll just drag this out here. So this is the table that we were talking about. Now, again, if you have something like this, you might drag, this is the Tableau experience, right? And then, well, what do I do when I want to get August out here? You start ending up with really weird behavior. How do I get these things all on, all in one chart? Things like that. So let's maybe back up and undo that. Since I did this talk last, I saw a, by the way, that was my birthday wish from my sister that you just saw pop up in the upper right corner there. So sorry about that. So one of the great things that's actually happened since I last delivered this talk at our customer conference, and thank you, Tiffany, for the happy birthday, is we actually have added some data preparation into Tableau Desktop. So let's do this. if I actually, because this is the one we were just working with, right? It's a little complex. So if I actually do a multi-select here and then click this little caret, I can actually generate columns right out of that. And we can rename this and maybe call it month. And let's call this values. And, you know, that's pretty much all you need to do. Now, all of a sudden, we have month, we have year. You can color these things by months. If you really want to, if you're really going to get into, there's a little bonus for you, everybody here. If you want to actually do a little bit more ETL, you can call this a date and maybe even do a little date math on this. So it would be something like date is a function, and then month is a field, plus, let's see, that's going to be quote /1 /quote. See, what I'm doing is actually building the text of the date, and then using the date function to actually transform that into a date. And now it works like this. I'll get rid of that. And you can actually use this as if it were a real Tableau date, right? There, pretty much the same view. So one other little bonus on this with Tableau is if you actually have something that looks like this. So this is the World Economic Indicators. This is actually a data set that we used when we were demoing Tableau 9. But what you can actually see here is, in addition to having that sort of pivoted data here, you've actually got a lot of other kind of junk up top here. You've got these headers, you've got blank columns, things like that. Let's see what happens when we bring that into Tableau. Let me grab a copy of this, and it's going to be, hold on. So I'll drag this. There's another great trick. I actually just grabbed this out of Finder, and if you can see that I've got this Excel file. If I let go of it, Tableau will automatically connect to it. And so I'm assuming that at least a few of you have seen this sort of behavior over the years, right? Where you get all these nulls, and Tableau starts naming your columns F1, F2, and it's kind of like, well, what's the deal? Tableau actually has built this little data interpreter, which will go in and intelligently scan the Excel file and try and pick out as best it can rows and columns. So if I actually hit turn on, Tableau will actually start to ignore all of those columns and the row headers and things like that. And then again, you can still, if you can scroll across here, you can actually just do this. And again, pivot. There's also this very cool split feature. So you've got things like, let's try this column here. So you can actually tell Tableau to split these columns, tell it to split on the colon, and Tableau will actually start to generate new columns. So another little bit of a bonus for data prep, and then here you are, pivoted field values. Here are the actual column names, so you can see that. And again, you could do the date calculation that I talked about earlier and move through that sort of thing. So the trickier bit comes when you have some a little bit more complex crosstabs. So let's actually take a quick look. And as you can now tell, I'm actually working on a Mac, but fortunately I also have access to Windows here. So anybody see something like this, where you get maybe a couple of columns here that are sort of header information, and then look at this. We actually have a percentage and a value sort of interleaved here. This is where, unfortunately, you still have to go back and do a little bit of the massaging right here in Excel. So the first thing you would do is actually rearrange that so that all of the values are in a row, and then all of these percentages are in a row. And then the next thing you'd want to do is split these guys out. So you've got just the values and then the percentages. And then I'll show you actually what this, what used to be my very favorite non-Tableau tool, it still probably is. I don't use it as much anymore now that we've got the pivot feature in Tableau Desktop. But we actually built a little Excel add-in that you can actually download right from our website. So if anybody sees this and is interested in using this, there is it's called the Tableau Data Reshaper. And it's simply an Excel add-in. And if you start it up, it'll look like this. So you've got this little Reshape Data button. In its simplest usage, you just click where you want it to pivot, hit Reshape, and it'll just spit it out for you. So, and then I renamed these columns. But then the next step of this process would be, so it'll end up looking like this. I've cleaned it up a bit. But we've reshaped the range values, so you actually have gotten, again, down to that granular level where you have the column and then the individual grain and value. Same thing with the percentages. And then in the final version, you simply combine the two. So you've got the columns, and then I simply copied and pasted the percentage column right into the other one. And there we are. And then you've actually got a nice, easy to work with shape of data. So let's go ahead and bounce quickly back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So stay on the PowerPoint. Okay, so we're here. So here we are. One of the other things that actually can often happen is that you'll end up with a ton of Excel files where you've got either a series where you've got, say May, June, and July in the same spreadsheet, same data, just different months worth of data. So somebody's sending you these months and you might be accumulating it. That can be a little bit difficult to work with. Or similarly, maybe a CSV download where you actually get this month's so maybe the June data comes in on July 5th and then the July data comes in on August 5th, and again, it's something that you're having to analyze, but how do you work with that in Tableau? Well, the first note to this one before I show you the actual approach in Tableau. Obviously, you could copy and paste these things in Excel, but there are other ways to deal with it within Tableau. So hold on just a second. So first of all, make the columns align, and then you can actually go ahead and let's bounce back over to the Windows machine. So I suppose it'll be easier to actually show you what I'm talking about here. So you have a column. You have a worksheet where you've got data from May, data from June, and data from July. Now, with Tableau, you can actually write a little bit of SQL to help take care of that for you. And it's going to look something like this. So what you can see is that in this spreadsheet, Tableau's identified all three of those worksheets as individual tables. But what we want to do, instead of joining the tables horizontally, essentially, we want to join them vertically, and that's called a union. So the way that function works is you'll basically select all of the columns from the May table, and then it's union, and then all of the columns from the June, union, all of the columns from the July. And that creates a vertically stacked, if you want to think of it that way, a vertically stacked copy of your database or of your Excel file. And then, again, if you come out to Tableau, you can simply drag and drop and get maybe the clicks versus the impressions or something along those lines. Drill into month, maybe a little deeper. You can come in here and you have that nice, rich Tableau experience right there. So that's actually pretty cool as well. There's one other thing you can do with custom SQL that I think is pretty neat that might be helpful, again, for the more adventurous of you out there with SQL. If you want to actually, if you have some experience with it, this is a great way to work with it. So the spreadsheet that we connected to directly here looks like this. Kind of the same thing. We've got that pivot issue where you've got a column for apples, a column for bananas, and a column for oranges. And what happens when you build a view with that is, how do you filter to just bananas or just oranges or something like that? You've actually got no dimension to actually make that work. So, you can actually bring the individual measures out and have them here, but this is not quite the experience we want. And what's that number of records thing? That kind of thing. If we actually take a look at the pivoted data, so this is what it looks like when you're pivoted. You have much more flexibility. Again, you only have the value and the dimension of the fruit, right? So again, with custom SQL, you can actually pick out the individual fruit, and this is kind of a combination of the union with being a little bit selective of the columns. So what you can see here is that we've selected the columns, and then the specific column, the apples column, we're actually renaming it to fruit, and then we're unioning that so that we stack the bananas as fruit, and then again oranges as fruit. So they all end up, bananas, oranges, and apples all end up in the same column, right? So you're defining the dimension with this, and you get the same experience that you had with Tableau, with Tableau with the pivoted data. So we're going to move on just a little bit to some of the tools in the next over the next few minutes here, since I know this talk was originally designed for an hour, so we'll compress this a little bit. But I think that having tools that actually can help you along the way, besides just Tableau, if this is part of your daily life, if corralling this sort of data and reshaping it and cleaning it up and that sort of thing is part of your life, get yourself some good tools. So Excel, you have the data reshaper you should get. I'm very partial to having a good text editor, not just Notepad, but one that has maybe even some coding functionality within it. In the Windows environment, I use TextPad. I use something called TextEdit on Mac. There's also one of the other popular ones around here is Notepad++. There's a product called OpenRefine. Let me bounce over to this. I actually have a couple of these that I'd like you to remember. So OpenRefine is actually a project that came out of, I think it grew out of Google originally and then became an open source project. This can allow you to do a lot of good data cleanup. It does require some scripting. There is also something called Data Wrangler. This one's actually pretty fun because if you see data that looks like this, this is like this is reported crime in Alabama. So this is really something that you might see in a newspaper article or something like that. You got the year and the value, year value, these spaces and columns. This thing will actually allow you to move through and say, I want to get rid of, if you do like a multi-select here, you can delete the empty rows. You can pivot these sorts of things. You could maybe, I like this one actually in particular. It's really cool because it actually learns, if I can actually do a proper multi-select here. You can see that as I highlight things, it'll actually start to extract these things, and then you can split after in. So you're actually generating these columns. You can populate down and things like that. And it's really, really powerful for quickly reshaping these data, again, into something usable in Tableau. And then data IO, or import IO, which I don't really have time to show you at the moment, but this is actually a great little product for scraping websites, where you can actually have the product look at a website, and again, it's similar sort of thing, where you can actually start. Oops, didn't like that website. By the way, I'm a Star Trek nerd, so you can kind of see that here. But the tool will allow you to actually go through and kind of, again, the way Data Wrangler did, be able to actually say, okay, this is data, and these are the columns. These are the columns that I want. This is how it lays out, and it actually, again, kind of learns as you go. So those are three of my favorite little tools. By the way, Data Wrangler has actually become this was actually built out of a Stanford research project in the computer science department, and it is now spun out to a company called Trifacta. So they actually have a paid version of this that I think is considerably more polished. I'm very pleased that they left the free one up on the website as well, though. So let's bounce back here. Nope, I already did that part. So well, I guess we're kind of right on top of, right up to about the bottom of the hour. So a quick little plug for some of the partners that we use in this sort of ETL space are companies like Alteryx, LavaStorm. I added Trifacta in there since they're now out and around. Great tools, and these all are Tableau partners. These are the paid people, by the way, just so you're aware. These are primarily people who are products that are designed for business users to use. So very much more straightforward than some of the big ETL tools. Actually, Informatica has several products. Some are desktop and business user focused. Some are designed to do that big heavy lifting that IT does in the background. So with that, I hope this gave you some ideas about how to work with some of the data that you'll come across out there in the wild, and at least knowing where to go to get some of these tools. The Tableau Data Reshaper, I think, is invaluable. Again, make use of the new tools within Tableau 9.0 as far as the cleanup. And by the way, if you are using those, please offer us feedback about the products. We'd love to hear what people would like to do with them in the future, and that helps us guide our product development decisions. So with that, I'd open it up to any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Eric. Great presentation. And before we get to questions, we'll just give you a nice happy birthday.
Thank you.
We did have one question come in regarding the reshaping tools. Are all of the ones that you demoed today, are they all Mac compatible?
The Tableau Data Reshaper, unfortunately, would need to be rewritten for Mac, and nobody has seen fit to do that yet. So hopefully and that's part of why it's nice for me to have my my VM on my Mac, so that I actually have access to the Windows version of Excel. So unfortunately, it won't work with the Mac.
Okay. Another question is, can you explain a little more about the pivot function and when you would use it?
Yeah. So let's flip back over to Tableau Desktop and see if I can find. So essentially, if we unpivot this, let's edit this data source, and then we can actually, by the way, this is slick too. So not only can you pivot the data, but you can unpivot the data. The usage of Tableau in this format basically means there's no way to build this hierarchical, this timeline. So you've got a value for April, but you can't actually have April followed by, I guess May comes after that, right? There's no way to kind of continue the timeline. You're going to always have this break, these individual chunks of data. So that's kind of how you want to think about the shape. If something like this happens, that should be kind of the first intuition that something's wrong. But it's the rule is basically to make this, years and months are related items. So you want those to be on the same row of data and not a separate column of data. I hope that makes sense.
Great. Thank you. That's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank Eric for presenting, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. Look for an email from us with a recording of this webinar and the presentation deck. And we do have another webinar in this series on July 30th, 10 a.m. Pacific, and we'll be talking about how to excel using Tableau. So very similar topic that Eric presented on. So if you're interested in learning more, check out our website to register for that webinar. And with that, we'll end today's webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.